Hey, this is Dr. Paul. Welcome to Bridges Live, and I'm on the phone with Miss Anita, and she's going to welcome you and welcome us to Bridges Live. And I like to bring people from here to there. Bridges Live is every Monday. You can catch us on iHeart and iTunes, and you can also catch us on my network, drpaulholisticscience.com. And I'm thank you for all my sponsors and the people who are listening to around the world. Let's get right into it because Bridges Live is about bringing us from here to there. So let's bring Anita in. Anita, thank you for joining me on Bridges Live.
Thank you for the invitation. I greatly appreciate it.
So, like I've said this before in so many of my interviews and talk shows that I just don't like like giving people's like bio and stuff. So just tell us a little bit about yourself and we can get in.
Okay, well, I am a 67-year-old parent of 5, 2 middle schoolers and 3 elementary students. And that is, without a question, my most important role at the moment, though obviously I work to support my family.
Most people don't know, Anita, that I am a father of 9, so I know.
Oh, my goodness.
7 girls and 2 boys, and now 6 grandchildren.
Oh, my goodness. Do you still have children at home?
No, well, with my ex-wife, he's 15, and he's the last one in high school.
I see. Wow, that 9 kids, that's amazing. 5, just, I feel like it kicks my butt on a regular basis. But, I adore them. They're all of my children are, recently adopted over the last 5 years. They're all siblings, and so that makes life interesting. I have 4 girls and 1 boy. My youngest is the boy, the man of the house in his opinion. But they're all great kids. They're all different from one another, so they keep me on my toes. In addition to that, of course, I do a lot of project management, and I still dabble in what I think I should probably call my avocation, which is politics. I spent nearly 30 years working on political campaigns.
I was with Ralph Nader.
You were with Ralph Nader?
I was.
Okay, I've never with Ralph Nader. Not that I have anything against him.
Yeah.
But I was primarily a Democratic operative.
So, with this political season, and you've write about different things about tell us about your articles. Where people can read your articles that you do write?
Well, thank you for asking. I don't write as much as I used to, just, with the kids keeping me busy. But I do post a lot, and that's because I have this restless curiosity that makes me be interested in different kinds of topics. And so I post a lot on LinkedIn, in both business articles, political articles. I'm, at this point, truly fascinated by what's happening in the UK with Brexit, because in some ways it's so similar, to what's happening here politically, though certainly not in a very good way.
Absolutely. I'm a political junkie. I've worked in politics because I love, my mother used to say, if you don't get involved in something, how do you know how it's working? So
that's true.
And I was in the military, and I dove deep into the military and then dove deep into politics. And what I have found, working with different candidates, like I was with Pat LaMarche when she ran for governor in the state of Maine, and then bounced over to Olympia Snow when she reelected at that time. It's just, my thing is, it's people. Most people look at parties, and we should be looking at people. Now, you've been in a Democratic operative. There's a lot of misconceptions and misconstrued information about parties. Do you want to attack that right now about what parties are or what parties aren't?
Well, first of all, I want to associate myself with your remarks about people versus party, because I think that's really critical. You should always, no matter what party, you should always be looking at the person who's going to serve your best interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes certainly in the past, we have perhaps many of us have voted for people who really have no place in public office for a variety of reasons. And I'm not only talking about Donald Trump. I mean, there were candidates who have not acted in the interest of America and our citizenry long before Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
And who sort of almost laid the pathway for a Donald Trump to emerge. Because if you don't, when you see something wrong and you don't speak up about it, you're as culpable as the person who did the wrong, in my view.
In my view, too. So I'm going to agree with you in your view. So that's two views. I know this is only the two, and there's probably many who would agree and probably many who wouldn't agree. But go ahead.
Yeah. Political parties, of course, have changed over the years because of the big money that is found now in political parties that support the operations. And, you know, it wasn't really until Barack Obama built his small dollar operation that people, everyday folks, had a chance to come together and to make a difference for a candidate in whom they believed. And that's helping us to mitigate some of the big money, but not nearly as much as we need to. When the Supreme Court issued the Citizens United decision, that changed everything in political parties.
Yes.
And how they operate. And we hope that a Democratic president is elected next year, I'm really hoping that we will have an opportunity to get something done about Citizens United. Of course, we also need not only to maintain a Democratic House, but also a Democratic Senate as well in order to get a bill like that passed. But, you know, the reality is that at the end of the day, it's not so much about partisan activity, because in part that's really what's ruining things along with big money. You know, the Senate used to be a place that where people on both sides of the aisle work together to do good. They may not have always agreed with one another, but they were willing to sit down and compromise. We have seemingly have lost that ability, particularly in the Senate, and it's really disturbing. And I think for those of us who are parents and grandparents, partisanship is an issue that we need to take a much stronger look at, because it doesn't help. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't get things done, whether you're talking about money in politics or climate change, the horrific actions on the border where families are being separated. We can't get anything done. And if the elected officials are not going to do it on their own, then it's up to us to make sure that they do. We really have to work hard.
Now, for the last two presidents, we have been racially divided. Is that something that's going to trend to be furthermore as a division, or is that something that's just it was starting to come out anyway with the other presidencies? Because I think so many young people, middle-aged people, are very racially motivated about their stance on politics, not about what is good for them.
Yes. You know, I worked on the Obama campaign here in South Carolina, and I was on the staff there, and it was really interesting to me because that was actually the first campaign I'd done in South Carolina. I moved down here and was fortunate enough to get to be hired because I had actually retired from campaign politics at that point. And it was really interesting to me being in a southern state to hear people talk about Barack and what a difference they felt he could make on the racial level. But unfortunately, and this is nothing new. I mean, there's racism everywhere. I grew up in New York City, and there's racism everywhere. It's not a Southern phenomenon. It just manifests itself differently here. I used to tell people after I'd been here a couple of years, they'd ask me what it was like living in the South, and I'd say the most polite. I've run into some of the most polite racists I've ever met in my entire life. They may hate your guts, but they're going to say good morning to you no matter what.
And in the North, people hate your guts and won't tell you.
Yes, exactly right. That's exactly right. So there is a lot that we still need to do. I can't say that we can blame everything on Trump. I know there are a lot of people who felt that George W. Bush was a racist. I never felt that. I obviously didn't like everything that he did, but I really felt that he was a good person who had a good heart and a good soul. He made some mistakes, yes, but he's not evil. He wasn't mean, and I don't believe he was or is now racist. So I wouldn't put it back on him. But there's such a contrast, of course, between Barack Obama and Donald Trump. It's sometimes hard to put your arms around it. And Trump, this isn't new. I mean, we can go back to the Central Park Five and his role in getting those poor young men convicted. You know, thank God for DNA testing now. And yet, even now, today, he does not acknowledge that those young men were innocent. He just cannot make himself do that. So it's not that his racial attitudes are new. I mean, as I'm sure you probably know, his family was taken to court by the Justice Department because they were denying housing to people of color in New York City. So this is something that he's grown up with.
But Anita, most people didn't know he had anything to do with that Central Park Five.
Oh, that's so true. That is so true.
Yeah, so you want to enlighten people about that, and that's what I love about Bridges Live, because people who don't know anything about the Central Park Five, there was 5 young black boys who got convicted of falsely raping a woman in Central Park, and this was around when I was young, in my days, my heyday of around 1985.
Yes. And, what's really sad about it is that, that was a story that was so easy for many people to believe because, there were issues where people of color were attacking people of color, attacking other folks. But those young men were not even given a chance. It was, okay, they're black, they must have done it, end of story, let's send them to jail, let's execute them. Donald Trump, in fact, took out a full-page ad in the New York Times, I believe it, and it could have been the Daily News and the Post as well, lobbying to get those children executed because they were children at that age.
Yep.
So he is not new to racism, and sometimes I look at people like him and I think, what chance did they have to not be a racist when you look at their parents and their grandparents? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just people, unfortunately, too often become what they see at home, until they get out into the world to see that there's something different. I grew up in the South Bronx in the, as we like to say, the shadow of Yankee Stadium. And in the old Yankee Stadium, not the new one. And, our neighborhood was very integrated. I mean, there were blacks and Puerto Ricans and Jews and Italians and, it was everybody. And so I grew up in an integrated environment. But not everybody, unfortunately, has the opportunity to do that. And until you get to know people who are different than you, it's very easy to believe the insane things that you've heard from other folks. Now, the bad thing about Mr. Trump is that he he's made it, how shall I say this, easy for those people who have racial antagonisms, I'll just call them, to be public about it. Well, because he's public about it.
Well, I also have to say this. I actually think Obama started this, and here's my take on it.
Okay.
So many black people have never voted in their life, right? Until Obama became president. And out of the woodworks, I would say, out of the darkest of the streets, so many blacks came out and voted who've never voted before, because they were hearing things they have never heard before. So they came to the polls and they voted, right?
Yes.
Donald Trump said, you know what? There's a lot of whites who have not voted before because they also don't agree with the government, and they've stayed in the shadows and into the darkness. So when he started to speak certain languages and vibrations out there, those people start to come out like the blacks did with Obama. So that was that thing he tapped into. He's like, because we're not going to win on a straight up fight, right? We're not, and Obama didn't win on a straight up fight either, because a lot of blacks voted that haven't voted in centuries. And you know, as a political junket, a lot of people, when they say how many people vote, well, this percent votes, this percent doesn't vote, these people vote this way, this people vote this way. So on a straight calendar, Obama wasn't going to win. What happened was so many people came out and voted. So that tipped the scales. On a straight calendar, Trump was not going to win. So he started to speak and brought people who've never voted before out of the woodworks, and now they voted. And so that's where I kind of equaled them out.
Well, you know, the 2016 election, and I understand exactly what you just said, also had some other complicating factors. And I strongly supported Hillary Clinton in 2016, mostly, to be honest, because she had been an amazing advocate and cabinet member under the Obama presidency. I mean, she did everything she said she was going to do. She's clearly one of the most capable human beings to ever be a public servant, and she would have made a good president. But she had, of course, as you know, years of that baggage of being attacked, and people just believe that stuff about her. The second factor, and this sort of relates also to what's happening now, is that if you look back at what Trump was actually saying about Hillary Clinton, a lot of that first came from Bernie Sanders.
Yep.
If you go back and look. And that was, to me, unacceptable. It's like, he's not a Democrat. I mean, he's in our primary. He says he's a Democrat. Now, he's not a Democrat. He's never been a Democrat. And he's going to now start to use those same tactics. He's going to try to use it on Warren. He's going to try to use it on Biden. I mean, he's just going to use it, period. And that really made a difference, too. The third thing, of course, is what happened with the Russians and their intervention in our election. And I really want to encourage people who have Netflix to look at the film The Great Hack about what exactly happened with that vote. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. Okay, it is amazing. If I had a wand, I would make every American sit down and watch that film, because it really breaks down exactly how they interfered with our election, and it is something that is going to happen again if we're not careful. And then I think the fourth piece was the presence of the Green Party and their candidate in the general election. Because if you look at the numbers,
it swayed it.
Exactly. And she obviously had support from the Russians as well. I mean, she was sitting at the table with Vladimir Putin before the election. They put money into her campaign, just like they're putting money into Tulsi Gabbard's campaign, it appears. So, we have to be really thoughtful about how we take in information. I guess I want to make one fifth point, and that is the impact of social media on our political process. It is very dangerous. Yes. And I'm on Twitter a lot. I'm on Twitter a lot. You know, sharing information, trying to clarify information. We cannot just look at the headline.
No.
We have to read the articles, because we should not be sharing information that we have not reviewed and thought through. Now, does that mean it's going to take a lot longer for people to tweet things or to share things on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever? Yes, but that's what we need to do if we're going to save our democracy.
But to save our democracy, you said a couple of things that I don't think people do often or do well, and that's read.
Yes, true. And you know, I'm working on a podcast project, you know, for a company myself because of that very reason. People will listen, and I very much appreciate you having me on today to share this, but people will listen, but they will not read. And there's something wrong with that equation right there. It's good to listen. It absolutely, podcasts like yours and many, many, many others can really help people to hear the information that allows them to make informed decisions. Every time I see somebody say, you know, on cable news or whatever, you talk about low information voters, it just makes me cringe.
It does. It does. It's like, wow. It's like, and you don't want to have to do, like, before you vote, you have to take an informational test. I don't want
Right.
I don't want to do that, because that goes back to like almost like the voters' rights of the 60s, you know, where you had to take a test to have a voter's registration card, you know, because some of those tests can be skewed to the way you want people to not vote, you know, so that's a tough one.
Yeah, it is, and I just I really wonder if we'd be better off if social media didn't exist to the extent that it does, or even if cable news were not 24/7. I listen to them. There, you know, the last few days there's all this business about Joe Biden and a longtime friend of his who was in the natural gas industry hosting a fundraiser for him in New York after the climate change debate. And if I've heard that story once, I've heard that story 25 times just on MSNBC. And I'm thinking, the Amazon is burning. The UK is about to explode.
Yep.
Donald Trump is doing all sorts of God knows what crazy stuff in the White House. But you all think that this is more important, that, you know, Biden's having a fundraiser with some guy that he's known for 20 years is more important than any of this other stuff. I barely heard anything about about these other issues over the last week because of all the, I don't understand who makes decisions in the newsroom sometimes. Maybe that's the best way to say it.
Well, Miss Anita, we know that the news that we grew up with isn't what it is now. And maybe,
oh my God,
and maybe even what we grew up with, we may not have known how bad it was one-sided until we got older and we were like, wow, they were on certain sides. And we have what we call independent news out there, and those are good resources to get, but yet you have to put in the work to go get those independent news stories. The other issue I believe we have, and I always talk about this, it's the emotional side. They know they've been attacking our emotional fears and subconsciousness to move us in a certain way. They have enslaved our minds to now enslave our physical movements. Now, does a person know that they're enslaved if they're being controlled by the waves of disinformation? No, they don't until they have to talk to someone or listen to something. Because so many, and I love my podcast. I love Bridges Live. I love doing what I do. But I always like to say, if you listen, I want to ask you a question, not to hear my answer, but I want you to hear your answer and do your research. That's why I do this, is to get you the information. So now you say, now I have another piece of information I didn't have before.
And the one good thing about the internet is that everything's available.
Yeah.
Everything is available, and it doesn't even take long whether you're using Bing or Google. If you can take 5 minutes and just look for an article on something that interests you, or something that didn't sound right, or something you want to learn more about, rather than, we spend all this time on our cell phones and our tablets, and I'm thinking, why? If you're going to do that, then why don't you use it for something useful? I mean, it doesn't have to be all day, every day. You can give yourself 15 minutes to educate yourself about a topic of interest, and you can know literally almost everything there is to know about it if you're willing to take the time. We've got to do better. We owe it to our children.
Well, speaking of children, and you have 5, and I want to get there, but I'm going to get there on a soft twist. I actually think Donald Trump is going to have another 4 more years. With that being said, how are you going to teach your children to keep reading information about the next thing that's coming?
Well, first of all, while I can't say that you're wrong about him being reelected, I can certainly say I pray to heck you're wrong.
Yeah.
4 more years of Donald Trump. I'm not sure that, truly psychologically he can even do 4 more years. To be honest about it, there's something going on with him that I really wish they would investigate. I mean, we all get older and we start to lose some of our faculties, and he definitely seems to be on the downside. But I don't know what I would do, because I have the news on all the time. Sometimes it irritates not so much my younger kids. They'll actually sit and watch with me. My older 2, the middle schoolers, I'll be listening to the radio or MSNBC on Sirius or something, and they'll start to fuss about, well, can't you put on some music? Can't you do this? Or occasionally they'll ask me a question about something they just heard, and I say, well, didn't you hear that? Haven't they mentioned this in school at all? No. And I don't know if they mentioned it in school or not. They're probably just not listening. So honestly, I'm honestly not sure. It is a conundrum, I think, for all of us. And, sometimes you just got to turn the news off. But I don't know. Honestly, with 4 more years of Trump, I'm not even sure that we would be able to stay here. We might have to move to another country, at least temporarily, because I don't want them exposed to really to the hatred, that will emerge if he's reelected, because he'll be totally untethered if he's reelected. And the Republicans seem to be doing nothing to kind of rein him in. So I don't know. What do you think? How do you get?
Well, a couple of things. Well, a couple of things. I've worked with kids. I've been an educator and been a martial art teacher. And I teach holistic sciences and about the health and life and the heart and the brain and I see kids today in schools who aren't learning, and it's not because they don't want to learn. It's because the schools are primed to teach them to be worker bees. So they're not teaching, they're controlling. There's a difference. They're not creating conscious thinkers. They're teaching kids to walk in a straight line, learn how to be quiet, learn how to follow directions, and not to be critical thinkers. That's what's going on in schools. Now, when they come out of schools, it is up to us parents. Now, the problem with parents is that they're either working too much, driving too far, or spending too much money on leisure. Okay? Those are the three things. Or don't have enough time in a day to pay the electric bill, pay the cable bill, and making sure that the kids do the work or learning, or what is that they're learning or not learning. So we have, so how do you get these kids to do it? I think we need to look at ourselves and say, what do I want? Now, I don't advocate moving to a different country, because I believe in teaching the kids to learn how to be sheepdogs and a bunch of wolves. Because there are a lot of people out there who are just going to be sheep, and I call them sheeple. Now, you can either be a sheep or you can be a sheepdog. I say let's train the kids to read diligently, to be sheepdogs, train them mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, so they can stand when this time turns to be what you say. It's going to be very nasty, and it is going that way. There's not a premise in my mind. It's not that won't go to a bad way, because it's going. Now, who are you in the midst of the storm, right?
Yes, that's true. I do think, though, that there are, I do agree that there are issues with K-12 education. I don't think there's any question about that. But I do think that there are a lot of good schools in the United States. I mean, we're fortunate. We did, when we moved here and the kids getting older, we did what they say on HGTV. We bought we leased the best house, the worst house in the best neighborhood, because I wanted to get my kids into really good schools, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to afford independent schools
right.
for that. And, 4 of my kids are in Montessori. So they are learning to,
yes, they are.
think. They are learning to think, but we need to do more. We as parents definitely need to do more to keep them focused on what makes sense for them. And, tablets and, we've got to cut back on the electronics. We use them too often, and I'm guilty of this myself as babysitters, because you're coming home and you're trying to get dinner on the table and get laundry done, get sure their homework is done. And so tablet is really easy, but we have to pay more attention to that, and we have to also, I think, just spend more time talking to our kids.
Yes.
About whatever. It doesn't have to be about politics or
it's talking.
Donald Trump. It's just talking and spending time and finding out what's going on in their heads, and particularly with my middle schoolers. I'm finding this becomes even more and more critical, because they are so susceptible to peer pressure and following their friends and what have you, that if we don't keep at it, then we're going to have they're going to have issues that are going to be much more serious than we realize down the road. I think that it's always good for children to be exposed to other cultures, and so I'm not abandoning my idea of moving someplace else so they can have a different experience.
Yeah.
But I'm also a committed American. I'm not looking to give up my citizenship or anything like that. I want my country, but I also just feel like I have to do, what's in their best interest. My youngest, as I mentioned, is a boy. He's 5. He's in kindergarten this year. Very feisty, very articulate. And I look at my black son, and I'm worried for him. I'm worried for him. I am.
We're worried for our black boys. And I'm an older black man. I'm in my middle-aged black man, and I have black sons. And I am definitely worried about our young black boys out here. I am.
Yeah. So, please God, don't let this happen, but if he were to be reelected, again, I just think it's going to create a situation where it's going to be very difficult and dangerous, to be honest, for our children out here. And I'm not willing to sacrifice them to that sort of environment. So I don't know. Maybe, we'll see what happens as time goes on. I'm hoping, as I say, that we have a different president. And honestly, if it's a Republican, other than Donald Trump and some of these other Looney Tunes, I could live with that. I can. That's not what I want, but I could live with that. But living with him for another 4 years, I just don't see it. I'm really prayerful that we will have elected officials, particularly in the Senate, who will stand up the way those 21 MPs stood up in Britain, in Parliament the other day. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to me
that was amazing.
Winston Churchill's grandson could be kicked out of the Conservative Party and banned from running again. It's just it's outrageous. It really is. But I applaud their courage. And we need for our elected officials to stand up the way they do. It's one thing to just decide not to stand for re-election, as I'm sure you've seen. There are nearly 20 now Republican House and Senate members who have chosen to not run because they don't want to have to be responsible for Donald Trump. But it would be so much better for us if they would just stand up to him.
Exactly.
That's what we really need.
So there's more to politics than just voting and not voting. We don't have enough strength and character of the people. And I was just thinking right now, we need a Mr. Smith to go to Washington.
No, you're right. We really do. I live in the congressional district of a man named Joe Wilson, who is famous for having shouted out, "You lie," when President Obama was giving his State of the Union address many years ago. And Joe Wilson he's a very nice man. When you meet him personally, his office does, if you call them and you have a problem, they're happy to help. But we're not getting anything out of him. And so we have a wonderful candidate now who's going to be running, Adair Burrows, who I hope will win. But it's not that he's a bad person. It's that we need someone who's going to stand up for our country. And there are just too many candidates. And there's some Democrats in that pool too, who are just not standing up and doing the right thing for America. And I hold us adults responsible for that state of affairs. So we just got to get off our duffs and do something about it.
Before we take off, give us something that we can do, because some people definitely need a call to action.
I would give several calls to action, if I may. One is, please make sure that you and members of your family are registered to vote. I don't really care what party you register for, but you have to participate. The second thing is just read and think. Read and think. Read and think.
Say it again.
Read and think. Don't make decisions about stuff based on headlines, because headlines often have nothing to do with what's actually in the body of the story. I've been fussing at the New York Times lately about some of their ridiculous headlines. You read the article and you think, what the heck are they talking about? So read and think before you share anything on social media, on pass in a newspaper. But read and think, please, because that's going to make a difference for us here in the United States. And just one last thing. If you have an opportunity to go out, you find somebody you really believe in who you think is going to be good for our country, do something for them. Give them $10. Get out and go do some canvassing. Do something. Because at the end of the day, this is our country. Mm-hmm. And if we really want to sustain it, we're going to have to take much more direct action than we have in the past few years.
Thank you, Miss Anita, for being on Bridges Live. I'd like to thank everyone for listening to us. We're here live every Monday, and you can always contact the show on Bridges Live, and then you have drpaulholisticscience.com. You can always reach me at drpaulwdyer@gmail, and your comments and your blessings and everything you do for this country and for your family and for your community, it does not go unnoticed. That's why we have to put our hands in the dirt. We have to hit the streets. We have to hug. We have to love. We have to read and listen. We have to read and listen and be cognitive and consciousness about what you do. Thank you so much for listening to Bridges Live, and I'll see you next week.